All right, Tanya Summary Shiur. We are by week 33, Kanai Nahara, and we're finishing off Shari Chazamuna with the second part of chapter 11 and chapter 12, and we're getting right into Igeres HaTshuva, a later part of Tanya, discussing the concept of the mitzvah of tshuva and all of the details that go around with it. Ironically enough, I feel like it's not discussing tshuva as much as its auxiliaries, but that's a side point. And we go into the first two chapters and part of the third. And without any further ado, let's get right into it. So, in chapter 11, we continue what we were saying about different combinations of letters emanating from the 10 divine utterances, and that these different combinations of letters create everything in the world, and how really these stem from Hashem's chachma and Hashem's wisdom, etc. Even though we already said in the past, elaborating on the idea that Hashem's wisdom is not like our wisdom, that it's really like a practical action as far as Hashem goes. All of those things are things that we've discussed. But we finish off chapter 11 by saying that these combinations are actually loftier than everything that exists in these worlds, or these letters, because they're higher, they're the source of everything that we have in these worlds. So even though our wisdom is somewhat analogous to Hashem's wisdom in a very distant way, they're both called the same thing at least, but still it's important for us to recognize and appreciate that these letters of Hashem's thought and these letters of Hashem's speech, which we said are the form of the expression, etc., that they are loftier than everything that we have and that we can conceive of in this world. That's the conclusion of chapter 11. In chapter 12, the Alter Rebbe really elaborates on this point, and it's really all just one theme. It's quite short to express in a summary form, which is that everything that we have in this world is an expression of those letters of Hashem's expression. It's maybe an expression of an expression of an expression. You have so many different combinations of the letters, and when Hashem created, let's say, the heavens, He created everything up there, and not only up there in the physical sense, but also up there in the spiritual sense. You have all of the heavens, which are grinding man for the tzaddikim, and the celestial Yerushalayim, and Beis HaMikdash, and Mizbeach, and everything Hashem created with these 10 utterances, everything is included in them. And I would say really the point the Alter was trying to bring out, and this is really a good summary for Shari Chav as well, is the idea that everything in the world is really godliness. Everything is really an expression of godliness in some way, shape, or form. Maybe an expression of an expression of an expression, but it's all godliness in some way that we can trace it back. And this knowledge, this belief, this emunah that we have that Hashem is able to interact with the world in this way, even though we can't properly appreciate how Hashem could create knowledge and action on the same plane, to the point that His knowledge that He created is inherently a part of Him, but is still so completely removed, which we discussed in previous chapters. But ultimately, that everything in the world is from Hashem, and everything is being constantly sustained by Hashem, and this contains a kernel of emunah within it, and with this appreciation of Hashem's unity in this world, the yichud and the emunah, where the yichud is able to drive the emunah, and the emunah is able to give to the yichud, and this is a very straightforward path in avodah that we're able to have for belief of Hashem, and ultimately that we can believe and perceive that Hashem truly is one, both in the upper realms and in the lower realms. So that concludes Shari Yichud Amunah. Be'ez Hashem Yisparach Yisala, with the help of Hashem, may He be blessed and uplifted. So that is Shari Yichud Amunah. Onward to Igeres HaTshuva, another exciting thing, Mechayel al Chayil. So the Alter Rebbe starts off by saying that we learn in Maseches Yoma, because the real secret in the entire Tanya is that there's a lot of Torah, I'm saying not just Chassidus, a lot of nigla going on behind the scenes as well. The Alter Rebbe starts off with a little bit of a discussion about the halachas of tshuva. So he says that there are, in a sense, 3 levels of tshuva. If a person violates a mitzvah aseh, it says that the person does not budge from there, assuming that they do tshuva. If they do tshuva, the person does not budge from there until they are forgiven. If a person violates a leis aseh, then tshuva will hang the sin in suspension until Yom Kippur will come, and Yom Kippur will then atone. If a person violates an extra special leis aseh, a leis aseh which contains a punishment of karis or misa, that is to say, being cut off spiritually, or death, which are both elaborated on in other places in Torah, which averes have those punishments. But if a person violates one of those, then tshuva suspends the avera, and Yom Kippur suspends the avera, and affliction is what ultimately wipes away the avera. The Alter Rebbe elaborates a little on the differences between mitzvah say and mitzvah slice to say. In some cases, we'll say that a mitzvah say takes precedence over a to say, but the reason for that is because mitzvah say is an opportunity that you either seize the opportunity or you lose it. So when faced with that, you seize the opportunity even if it comes at a certain cost. But when it comes to what's easier to get rid of, a lack of a mitzvah say is it's done, it's gone, and so to be forgiven, you could just be forgiven. For a to say, it causes a negative effect. And Yom Kippur is what properly gets rid of that negative effect, and that's why the sin is suspended until Yom Kippur, which has the power to get rid of the negative effect. Within the introduction, the Alter Rebbe sets out to correct some mistakes which were probably prevalent in his time. They're still probably prevalent nowadays too, unfortunately. But he sets out to correct some mistakes which are prevalent about the perception of the mitzvah of tshuva. So he says that tshuva is leaving the avera. That is what tshuva is. Tshuva is saying that a person recognizes something that was done wrong, and that's a bad thing, and I don't want any part in that anymore. That is what tshuva is. The Alter Rebbe says some people are mistakenly under the impression that tshuva is fasting. That a person fasts, or they suffer in some way, but it's usually fasting, and that is what gets rid of the avera. That is the tshuva. So the Alter Rebbe says I need to elaborate on this, and this is going to be the theme really of the entire Gersa Tshuva, to explain what's the difference between tshuva and what I'll call the auxiliaries of tshuva, the things that go around tshuva, the things that have what to do with tshuva. So the first thing is, says the Alter Rebbe, that even when we said before that thing about how for very serious averis, tshuva and Yom Kippur suspend the avera, and then suffering is what really cleans a person off from it, that's referring to Hashem inflicted suffering. And the Alter Rebbe says that is to say that when Hashem sees that the person is taka doing tshuva, as in they've done tshuva. We said already that the whole premise of this conversation is a person does tshuva, and then at what point is the avera done with. So if a person does tshuva, then they move forward and Hashem sees it, and he's like, wow, this person did tshuva. Then Yom Kippur inspires even more. And then what Hashem will do, if Hashem is gracious to the person, is he'll give them some kind of suffering, by means of which they're able to move past whatever negative effect the Avera gave them. But the tshuva is something that takes place before that. The tshuva is done before the person is properly atoned for in the Avera. The Alter Rebbe says this is why the Rambam and the Snag, two great halachic codifiers, did not mention the concept of fasting in their mitzvahs of tshuva at all. Even in the concept of averis that have a violation of kares or of mitzvahs based in, the Alter Rebbe says because fasting is not an essential part of tshuva whatsoever. If Hashem wants a person to suffer to help them atone for whatever aver, to be able to be rid of whatever negative effect it caused, Hashem will do that on His own. That is His business, and as far as the person's business is, the mitzvah of tshuva has nothing to do with that. The mitzvah of tshuva, says the Alter Rebbe, is abandoning the avera, and he says there's a mitzvah particularly to say vidui, to confess a person's averis to Hashem. That's the mitzvah of tshuva. The Alter Rebbe says, you might ask me, it says in Yoel that you should return to Hashem with fasting and with tears. So the Alter Rebbe says it's not to say that that's the mitzvah of tshuva. He says that is to nullify a divine decree which was decreed upon Yoel's generation. In Yoel's generation, there was a divine decree that there should be a plague of locusts, and he says that the prophet was saying that if you fast and if you cry, then Hashem will annul the decree. Nothing to do with the contract we have with Hashem and the mitzvahs that we do, or that a person chas v'shalom doesn't do, and how to atone for that. Nothing to do with that. There's a gzera, you want to be involved with the gzera, that you do through fasting. It says Alter Rebbe, this is actually the reason for fast, that we fast whenever there's something negative that comes on to the Yidden. It shouldn't be chas v'shalom. The Alter Rebbe says this is what it says clearly in Megillas Esther, that there was an actual gzera, and so Esther said we're going to fast, not because it's like particularly related to tshuva, but there's a gzera, so we're going to fast to try to nullify the gzera. So the Alter Rebbe says that you might tie it to me. There's a lot of great Hasidic codifiers. I don't know if that's the right way of saying it, but a lot of great Hasidim of old, of Rishonim, that they have whole lists of fasts that a person should fast to atone for different sins. It says the Arkeach, Sefer Chassidim, have many fasts listed, also the Arizal, of different averis. If a person gets angry, they should fast 151 fasts. And if a person is Meitzi Zer Lavatala, they should fast 84 fasts, and many similar numbers of fasts for different averis, whether they're Deraisa or they're Abanon, or even if they're not necessarily an avera but a Midah. The Alter Rebbe says that these fasts are not tshuva fasts, are not for a person to do tshuva, but rather what they are is they're, in a sense, a hope of circumventing divine punishment for whatever a person may have done. which is to say that there may have been something negative coming to a person for whatever negative thing they did, and as such, they want to circumvent that, so they'll say, I'll do it on my own terms, I'll be able to fast on my own day. The Alter Rebbe says another reason why a person would do it is because maybe they did tshuva and they want to be able to achieve a higher level of tshuva. Maybe they did tshuva only because they were afraid of whatever punishment Hashem would lay out for them. So now they want to do it with terms of love. They want to do it. They want to return to Hashem purely because they love Him. So they'll do tshuva. This is one explanation of what the Alter Rebbe is saying. But they'll say we'll do tshuva, and after the tshuva or with the tshuva, we'll fast. And the fast will be if there was any punishment to become. We're not here for the punishment. We're not here to avoid the punishment. Rather, we're here only to return to Hashem out of love. So that concludes chapter 1 of digestible. I don't know if that was a summary as much as more of a reading, but there's a lot of teichin to cover. I don't want to miss any important details, and there are a lot of important details. Anyhow, on to chapter 2. So the Alter Rebbe says that this conversation is regarding how to atone for an avera. That is to say, that an avera has a negative effect in the world. Either something that could have been brought down to the world, that the opportunity was lost, or a negative effect that was imprinted in the world, or imprinted on the world, which was then wiped away. But ultimately, says Alter Rebbe, there's a whole other aspect of returning to Hashem, which is to say that a person could get by on the technicalities. That is to say, a person can say that they have a contract with Hashem. And the contract says that there are 248 things that you should do and 365 things that you shouldn't do, and you got to keep to the terms of the contract. And if a person doesn't keep to the terms of the contract, then there's another clause, and that clause states that you do tshuva, and you feel bad about it, and you decide that you're not going to do it in the future, and a person will actually truly be keeping the contract with Hashem to the fullest extent. That is what the contract says. Perfect. Says Alter Rebbe, there is another aspect to this, which is that you want to be in good standing with Hashem. Being in good standing with Hashem doesn't necessarily mean keeping the contract to begin with. That's not a point that Alter Rebbe makes, but it's important to appreciate that there's a lot of Chassidus Shemaisis v'chulu about people that weren't necessarily the greatest tzaddikim and they've done Averis, but they have a great schosim. How do you have a good schos? It's not just the idea that you did a really big mitzvah. It's that a person has a good standing. But there's another point of if a person just keeps the Torah to the exact letter, and even if they do an Averi, they do tshuva, but they'll still be in a negative standing because the Alter Rebbe compares it to a person that did something negative to the king, and they'll appease the king in whatever way they do, but ultimately after that you send a gift to the king to say, I want to be in a good standing with you. So the Alter Rebbe says this is like the concept of bringing a carbon oil after a person does an avera, even if it's only violating a mitzvah, say, as long as it's not an avera that had a chiyuv for another kind of carbon, a chatas or an asham, a person would bring an oila after doing an avera. This is to, in a sense, get into Hashem's good standings, to say, I want to cultivate my relationship with you further, more than just my technical obligations. The Alter Rebbe says, nowadays we don't have any karbanis, so what we do instead of a karban is, as the Gemara says, that we fast. And the essence of fasting is that we're saying that we have a certain amount of calories that we store in our bodies, and if we're not eating, then we're burning those calories. Those calories burnt should be like whatever part of a karban is burnt. And Alter Rebbe says this is why we find a lot of Tanoim and Amirim, they would fast for things like this, even for things that aren't necessarily technically an Aveira, for very slight misdemeanors, but they would fast because they wanted to be in Hashem's good standing in this way. And the Alter Rebbe says, based on this principle, is how the Chachamim, the Chachmei Emes, the Kabbalists of the early generations, the Chassidim Rishonim, this is how they laid out their principles for fasting for all of these various misdemeanors that they laid out. That concludes chapter 2 of the Geras HaTshuva, and moving on to chapter 3, the Alter Rebbe expresses, at least at the beginning, which is where we got to in this week, the Alter Rebbe says that a person might be wondering, how do I measure these Averas? Which is to say, is it that one Avera causes one blemish, or is it that each Avera consecutively causes more and more blemish in the world until the point that if a person does an Avera 1,000 times, it's going to cause they need to do this measure of atonement, however many times it is, in order to atone for this amount of Averas. So the Alter Rebbe says that the compromise that's accepted is to do up to 3 times the amount of fasts for whatever Avera it was. So let's say it would be 1 fast. If a person does the Avera 20 times, they need to fast 3 fasts. If it was 2 times, they need to fast 2. If it was 1, they need to fast 1. But if it was however many above 3 included, then it's 3 fasts. And the Alter Rebbe bases this off of Zohar, which says essentially that the way that an Avera functions is not like a one-time thing. It's not like a consecutive thing that builds up as it goes. It's like making a stain in a cloth, that if 1 droplet falls on, then it's a droplet. If 2 fall on, then it's 2. And if it's 3, then it permeated the garment until the other side. So in this way, we could appreciate that a person does an Avera 3 times, it causes the fullest extent of the damage that it can do. Less than that, it could cause less, but up till 3 times, it's the most that it can cause. And that is the greatest measure of an Avera that a person could be accomplishing a stain in the world. So that concludes where we're up to in chapter 3, but the Alter moves on from this in pivoting almost in a very different direction, and really this is the direction he pivots in for kind of the rest of Vigras HaTshuva. Anyhow, stay tuned. Good stuff. Looking forward to Mirz Hashem.